Order in.
Shokugeki! さあ、水戸さんの英語和牛にどう対抗するのか。
Orders up, service please. This week in Anime Kitchen, we'll be recreating Yukihira Soma's Chaliapin steak Donburi. For each steak that needs to be marinated, we will use between 1.5 to 2 onions. We just so happen to get a double order, so we'll be finely dicing at least 3 onions, ensuring to keep them consistent in size as they will be used for cooking later as well. Once all the onions are finely diced, we'll transfer them into a shallow container and set them to one side. From there, we move on to our steaks. Like Soma, we're going to be using sirloin. Seeing that this is meant to be a dish that can be easily eaten with chopsticks, we're going to remove the bones from the steak along with any bits of tendon or connective tissue we find along the way to make for a better eating experience. When we finish tidying up and deboning the steaks, we score the surface of the meat by making shallow cuts along its length at a 45-degree angle. Then we rotate the steak around and repeat the scoring process, leaving us with a crosshatch pattern. Then, to ensure that the end result is as tender as possible, we also tenderize both sides of the steak using a meat mallet until it's about 1.5 centimeters thick. Once the steaks have been prepared, we'll transfer them into the container with the diced onions and ensure to coat the entire surface area of the steak with an even layer of the diced onions. We then cover the container with plastic wrap and allow the meat to marinate in the fridge for 30 minutes to 1 hour. By marinating the meat in onions, we are in theory allowing the enzymes from the onions to begin breaking down the proteins within the meat, resulting in a more tender piece of steak. While the steaks are marinating, we can prepare the umeboshi paste that will be folded into our white rice for the donburi. To make the paste, we simply remove the pits from 4 to 5 umeboshi and then we finely slice and dice the plums before smearing them against the chopping board with the flat of our knife to make a fine paste. When we're happy with the consistency of the paste, we set it to one side until we're ready to assemble. 45 minutes later, the steaks have finished marinating, and at that point we're going to remove the steaks from the onion, ensuring to brush off any onions that are clinging to the surface. We allow these to sit to one side for 10 to 15 minutes so that they aren't fridge cold when being introduced to the pan. Moving over to the stove, we'll place a frying pan over medium heat and begin melting 1 to 2 tablespoons of butter. Once the butter is melted and foamy, we add the diced onions and ensure that they're fully coated in the butter and season them with salt and pepper. These are then sauteed for 10 to 15 minutes until they turn a light golden brown and ever so slightly start to caramelize but still retain some of their form and texture. At that point, we remove the onions from the pan and add in a couple more tablespoons of butter along with a small amount of oil to help the butter from burning before cranking the heat up to high. Once the butter is foamy and hot, we carefully lay the steaks away from ourselves to ensure we aren't splattered with the hot oil and butter. We always have to ensure that we're working safely in the kitchen. We'd also never forget to season the steaks with a generous amount of salt and black pepper. Our diners tonight have requested that their steaks be cooked medium rare. To gauge this accurately every time, we suggest using a meat thermometer to check the internal temperature of the beef. For a medium rare, we need to hit an internal temperature of 54 degrees Celsius. When the internal temperature reaches 50 degrees Celsius, we're going to remove the steaks from the pan and transfer them to a plate and cover it with foil and allow them to rest for 10 minutes while we finish the rest of the dish. During the resting time, the residual heat within the steak will bring up the internal temperature to about 54 degrees Celsius, and we should be greeted with a beautiful medium rare when sliced. Now, if everything has gone to plan, between cooking the onions and the steak, a thick layer of fond should have formed on the bottom of the frying pan. This is exactly what we want to see, as there is a wealth of flavour trapped in there just waiting to be incorporated into our onions and sauce. To begin our sauce, we deglaze the pan with 120 ml of red wine, making sure to scrape up all that beautiful fond in the pan. Once all of the fond has been scraped off, we add in 2 tablespoons of soy sauce along with our sauteed onions from before. We ensure that the onions are completely coated in the sauce before adding in the cornstarch slurry that was made with 1 tablespoon of cornstarch dissolved into 2 tablespoons of water. We work this into the onion sauce until it becomes thick and luscious in texture. When we're happy with the consistency of the sauce, we turn off the heat and incorporate 1 more tablespoon of cold butter and mix it into the sauce to give it extra body and shine. If we find that the onion mix is too wet to hold its form, we simply strain the onions from the sauce through a sieve and then we use each component separately during the assembly. Speaking of, to begin preparing for the assembly of our donburi, we first look at our steak. We slice the steak on a bias for both better presentation and to make this dish more chopstick friendly. Now let's just take a second to admire the beauty that is a beautifully cooked medium rare steak. As a side note, for those who want to gauge steak doneness but don't have a meat thermometer, another way to check the doneness of your steak is by using the hand trick. To do this, start by pinching together your thumb and your pointer finger on one hand. Press the area below your thumb with your other hand, and this gives you an indication of how a rare steak should feel. Going down the line, the middle finger and thumb is for a medium rare steak, ring finger for medium, and pinky for medium well to well done. This method, while not as reliable as a meat thermometer, is good for those who like to cook more by feel, plus that gives you an excuse to just cook more steaks, and that's always a good thing. Now, it's always imperative to check the quality of the product before it's served to our guests, so we're just going to try a little bit of the tail here and be instantly reminded of why we love cooking, because delicious food makes people happy. Now it's finally time to put our donburi together. We begin with our bowl of white rice, to which we're going to add 1 to 2 teaspoons of the umeboshi paste and fold that throughout the rice. The acidity of the umeboshi paste will be a complementary flavour that will help to balance out the richness of the steak and the onions. Next, onto the rice we lay over slices of our beautifully cooked sirloin steak. After that, we'll spoon over some of the strained red wine sauce across the sliced steak and rice. We try to be generous with this, as a flavourful sauce mixed with hot white rice is a simple but utterly delicious and wonderful thing. Next, we're going to add a very generous pile of those saucy onions on top of the steak and rice. These onions are packed full of flavour and also bring a slightly firmer texture to the donburi. Finally, as garnish, we sprinkle over some finely sliced spring onions, and here you have your order of Chaliapin steak donburi from Shokugeki No Soma. Now, oddly enough, our customer didn't show up for the meal, and seeing as we can't let this go to waste, let's see how it turned out. Now, I know this might be the first thing I've had all service, but still, given the reaction, I'm sure you can tell that this turned out very well. During the marinating process, the steak has taken on some of the flavours of the onions and is beautifully tender and easy to eat. The sauce is both delicious and adds a wonderful creamy texture to the donburi. The red wine's fruity and earthy notes, along with the saltiness and umami flavours of the soy sauce, help to offset the bold flavours of all the onions. The onion flavour is absolutely still celebrated and prevalent throughout the donburi, but it doesn't come across as overpowering, which is surprising considering that they're the featured ingredient of this dish. In addition to this, the slight acidity that you get with each bite in this donburi from the umeboshi rice is the reason why this dish can have so many rich components and still remain as something that can be easily eaten in one sitting. Now that I've actually tried this dish for myself in real life, I can see why the judges were asking for a second serving, because that's exactly what I did after the camera stopped. As always, my friends, thanks so much for watching today's episode. If you enjoyed it, let me know by dropping it a like down below, and tell me in the comments what food from anime and other media you'd like to see me make in the future. Subscribe to the channel for a new menu item every single week, and until then, pull up a chair, unfurl that napkin, and I'll see you in the anime kitchen. Cheers.